The main dining room of the Grand Royal Hotel resembled a temple dedicated to ostentation. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of lights onto tables adorned with imported flowers, and the aroma of expensive perfumes mingled with the delicacies circulating on silver platters. At the center of it all sat Enrique Duarte, a 39-year-old businessman with a fortune built in the financial markets. Enrique strode through the space like a general displaying his conquests. His custom-made suit, sewn by Milanese tailors, cost more than the annual salary of many of his employees. On his wrist, a limited-edition Swiss watch sparkled each time he raised his hand to greet a guest. The party, organized to celebrate his company's 15th anniversary, was also a showcase to reaffirm his position of power before the elite in attendance. "Ladies and gentlemen, please follow me to the main lobby," he announced with a practiced smile. His voice echoed throughout the room, interrupting conversations and laughter. The crowd followed him, curious to see what would happen next. Beneath a dark blue cloth lay the surprise prepared for that evening. With a theatrical gesture, Enrique pulled back the cloth and revealed a red sports car gleaming under the lights. "Here is the masterpiece of Italian engineering, my new treasure." The roar of the engine as it was started by an assistant sent the audience into a frenzy. Enrique smiled with satisfaction. This was the planned climax of his celebration. But what he didn't notice, at least not immediately, was the presence of a simple man standing a few meters from the car. He wore an old suit jacket and worn shoes. His name was Ottavio Nogueira, 68 years old, and had been the hotel's caretaker for over 3 decades. He was leaving after fixing a problem with the boiler when curiosity made him stop in front of the spectacle. One of the guests noticed the inconspicuous figure and commented jokingly, "Enrique, it seems someone got the party address wrong." Laughter erupted all around, and the businessman turned to the intruder. His eyes narrowed in disdain. "Let him stay," Enrique said, interrupting the security guard who was already approaching. He had found a new way to entertain those present. "Tell me, sir, what do you think of my acquisition?" Ottavio, embarrassed by the sudden focus, took a deep breath before replying. "It's a beautiful car, without a doubt." "Beautiful?" Enrique laughed, encouraging the others to do the same. "It's more than beautiful. It's art in motion, something you wouldn't understand." The simple man didn't argue. He simply walked around the car, observing it carefully. In a low voice, almost to himself, he commented, "The paint on the left side has been overpolished. This could affect its durability." Silence fell for a moment. Enrique blushed, uncomfortable with the unexpected observation. "And since when does a janitor understand Italian cars?" he teased. Ottavio looked up, firm but calm. "I understand enough to see beyond the surface gloss." The words hung in the air like a veiled challenge. Enrique felt the need to reassert his authority before the audience. He wouldn't allow an unknown person to tarnish his moment of glory. The suppressed laughter among the guests made Enrique feel provoked. That night should be remembered as a milestone in his success, not as the moment a stranger dared to question his perfection. He took a few steps toward Ottavio, handing him the car keys with a smile that hid mischief. "If you really know more than just cleaning hallways, prove it. Start my car. If you can, it's yours. If not, everyone will see you're nothing more than a nosy pry." A murmur of surprise ran through the lobby. Some thought it was a harmless joke. Others saw the cruelty in the challenge. Among them was Beatriz Ramos, Enrique's press secretary, who watched the scene with visible discomfort. She leaned closer and whispered, "Enrique, this isn't necessary. You've already shown enough." But he didn't listen. He was intoxicated by the attention, by the power to manipulate the situation to his advantage. "So, Mr. Nogueira, do you accept or not?" Ottavio hesitated. He didn't want to be there. His life had always been marked by honest work and silence. He didn't seek out the stage nor disputes, but there was something in Enrique's haughty gaze that made him uncomfortable. Perhaps it was wounded pride, perhaps simply the certainty that he couldn't allow himself to be treated like an object of scorn. "Okay," he said calmly. "I'll try." The crowd parted, forming a circle around the car. Cell phones were raised, ready to record what promised to be a humiliating moment. Enrique sat back with his arms crossed, convinced he would win. Ottavio entered the vehicle with slow, almost ceremonial movements. He ran his hand over the steering wheel, adjusted the seat, and examined the controls with disconcerting familiarity. The room, which seconds before had been abuzz with laughter, fell into an expectant silence. With a confident gesture, he engaged the ignition system. The engine responded immediately, roaring with precise power. There was no hesitation, no misfire, just perfection. The shock on Enrique's face was shared by the guests. The laughter they expected never came. Instead, they heard the steady roar of the car, echoing like a sentence. Ottavio turned off the engine and exited the vehicle with the same serenity he'd used when he'd entered. He handed the keys back. "You're in good hands, Mr. Duarte. But remember, a car may look impressive on the outside, but it only reveals its true value to those who understand it." The words weighed heavily on Enrique's ego. He felt control of the evening slipping through his fingers. Beatrice watched him from afar, torn between relief at the lesson taught and concern for her boss's reaction. Cheap trick. Enrique suddenly shouted, trying to regain ground. "You must have worked in the garage. Someone trained you to embarrass me." But deep down, even he knew he was facing something greater than his arrogance could bear. The silence after Ottavio's demonstration still hung in the air when some guests began exchanging awkward glances. What should have been a spectacle of grandeur had become a portrait of exposed arrogance. Enrique tried to maintain his posture, but his discomfort was evident. Whispers spread like small flames. He really started the car. The old man knew what he was doing. Enrique went too far. Each comment, even whispered, hit the businessman like a blow. Beatrice approached discreetly. "You need to end this before it gets worse," she advised quietly, but Enrique couldn't bear the thought of giving in. "No one will remember this tomorrow," he replied coldly, still clutching the car keys as if they were his last defense. Ottavio, oblivious to the vanity disputes, simply straightened his worn jacket and headed for the exit. The simple gesture, however, carried a dignity that contrasted with the luxury spread around him. Many watched him, some even in respectful silence. It was at this moment that another figure stood out, Alberto Menezes, a journalist for a business magazine covering the event. He had recorded every detail on his cell phone. For him, there was no better story than the public downfall of one of the city's most arrogant businessmen. Beatrice noticed the reporter's interest and tried to intervene. "Alberto, I don't think it's appropriate to publish this. It could destroy reputations." The journalist smirked. "My job isn't to protect reputations, but to report on what's happening." Henry overheard part of the conversation and gave him a disdainful look. "Do what you want. Everyone knows who I am and what I've accomplished. Nothing changes that." But inside, the sentence sounded less like confidence and more like a desperate plea to himself. The party continued, but the glow had faded. Small groups chatted in hushed tones, and the focus of attention was no longer the sports car, but the host's embarrassment. Enrique milled about, trying to regain his prestige with forced smiles, but the memory of the scene hung heavy in the air. When the last guests left, only he and Beatrice remained in the nearly empty ballroom. "It was a disaster," she said bluntly. Enrique dropped his keys on the table, massaging his temples. "Do you think my career could be ruined by an unknown janitor?" "It's not about him, Enrique. It's about how you acted. People saw who you really are tonight." The sentence hung between them. For the first time in a long time, he had no answer. As he stepped out into the parking lot, he saw his car bathed in the reflection of the hotel lights. What had once symbolized power now seemed like a burden, but he couldn't admit it, not even to himself. And as he drove silently through the city, he didn't know that this would be just the first crack in his wall of arrogance. The next morning, Enrique woke to his phone ringing non-stop. Messages, notifications, and links piled up frantically. When he opened the news, there it was, A headline illustrated with a photo of Ottavio starting his car in front of the crowd. The millionaire challenged and defeated by a janitor. The headline read in bold letters. Enrique felt his stomach churn. The scene he had tried to downplay the night before was now all over the internet. Opinion blogs, social columns, even radio shows were commenting on the episode. What had once been a source of pride had become a public joke. The atmosphere in the office was tense. Partners and directors avoided looking him directly. Some clients had cancelled meetings scheduled for that week. Beatrice entered his office carrying a stack of clippings. "It's everywhere. If we don't do something, his image will be irreparable." Enrique paced back and forth, enraged. "I won't kneel before some old man. This will pass." But Beatrice, with a firm look, retorted, "It won't go away, Enrique. What happened wasn't just about a car, it was about how you treated a person." And everyone saw it. The words echoed in his mind throughout the day. For the first time, he began to feel the weight of shame instead of anger. Late in the afternoon, he decided to go out alone, away from the suffocating office. He wandered the streets aimlessly until, without realizing it, he approached a simple neighborhood. He stopped in front of a small workshop, the kind that smells of grease and freshly brewed coffee. At the door, tuning a child's bicycle, was Ottavio. The old man looked up and, upon recognizing him, showed no surprise. "Are you here looking for another show, Mr. Duarte?" he asked calmly. Enrique swallowed hard. He wasn't sure exactly what had brought him there. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need to understand who this man was, who had managed to dismantle his facade in just a few minutes. They wanted to talk. Ottavio wiped his hands on a cloth and pointed to a wooden bench. "Sit down." A little conversation never hurt anyone. The simple ambiance contrasted with the luxurious offices where Enrique was accustomed to doing business. There was no champagne, just bottled water and the distant sound of children playing ball in the street. "Why did you do that? Why did you accept my challenge?" Enrique asked, breaking the silence. Ottavio smiled slightly. "Because sometimes you have to show that not everything can be bought with money. You wanted an audience to humiliate someone, and I didn't accept the role of an extra." The words hit Enrique with the force of an invisible punch. He remained silent, unable to respond. Meanwhile, across the street, a young woman named Clara, a volunteer on a community project, watched the two. She had known Ottavio for years and knew this meeting could change the course of something bigger. Enrique didn't know how to react to Ottavio's words. He felt diminished before a man who, despite his lack of apparent wealth, possessed a dignity impossible to buy. As he tried to gather his thoughts, the young woman who had been observing the scene approached. "Ottavio, I brought the books for the children," Clara said, holding a bag full of notebooks and children's stories. Only then did she notice Enrique's presence, and her eyes lit up with curiosity. "This is the host of yesterday's party," Ottavio replied simply. Clara nodded slowly, as if she'd already read about the episode. But instead of contempt, there was a kind of quiet anticipation in her expression. "If you've come this far, perhaps you're willing to listen." Henry raised his eyebrows.
"Hear what?"
"Hearing stories that don't fit in the headlines," she replied. "Want to come with me to the community center?" Against all instinct, he accepted. Perhaps it was the need to prove to himself that he still had control, or perhaps something deeper. Silently, beginning to awaken, the community center was a few blocks away, in a simple building painted light blue. Upon entering, Enrique found children running around, walls covered in colorful drawings and makeshift shelves filled with donated books. It wasn't luxurious, but the place was teeming with life. Clara explained that they offered tutoring, music workshops, and sports. "Everything is done with donations and volunteer work. Ottavio fixes the electrical system when it breaks, and I coordinate the reading classes. We do what we can." Enrique watched in silence. Every detail contrasted with the glamorous parties and glass offices he was accustomed to. A girl approached, holding a broken toy car. "Clara, can the guy fix it?" she asked, looking at Enrique. Surprised, he took the toy in his hands. He had no idea how to fix it, but the child's confident gaze disarmed him. He tried to adjust the wheels without success. He laughed awkwardly. "I guess I'm not that good at this." Ottavio picked up the stroller, made a small adjustment, and handed it back to the girl. "It's ready, little one. But thank him too, because he tried." The child smiled at Enrique before running off. The simple gesture touched him in an unexpected way. He wasn't used to being seen without a mask, without titles, just as a man trying to help. Clara noticed his expression. "Mr. Duarte discovered something important today. Here, it's not what you have that matters, but what you offer." Enrique fell silent. For the first time, he felt that all the brilliance he displayed was useless in the face of such a disarming truth. As he left the community center, the weight of Ottavio and Clara's words echoed in his mind. He realized that perhaps the greatest fortune lay not in bank accounts, but in the ability to touch lives. That night, Enrique returned to his luxurious penthouse, but everything seemed different. The expensive paintings on the walls and the marble floor reflected only an uncomfortable emptiness. He sat in front of the panoramic window and spent hours gazing at the illuminated city, remembering the faces he had encountered at the community center. In the following days, he tried to return to his office routine. Meetings, charts, numbers, everything seemed meaningless. The repercussions of the party still echoed, but something inside him no longer cared so much about the press's opinion. What really haunted him was the question Clara had left in his mind. What are you offering the world? One afternoon, she decided to return to the community center, this time without an invitation. She found Clara organizing a bookshelf and children rehearsing an improvised play. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said, surprised. "Neither do I," Enrique replied. "But I think I need to be here." Clara watched him carefully. "If you really want to help, you'll have to learn to listen more than you talk." Enrique nodded. He spent hours sitting on a wooden bench, listening to stories of parents who worked double time to support their children, of teenagers who dreamed of being musicians or engineers but lacked the resources. Each story struck him like a revelation. Over time, he began to use his influence in new ways. He organized a fundraising campaign to renovate the building, secured donations of computers and books, and persuaded well-known business people to contribute. But he didn't stop there. He showed up frequently, helped with tutoring, listened to the children, and allowed himself to be transformed by the human contact he had always avoided. Ottavio, always present, observed the change discreetly. "You're learning fast, Mr. Duarte," he once remarked. "I'm not the same man I was at that party anymore," Enrique replied with a tired smile. Clara added, "And maybe, for the first time, he's discovering who he really is." Months later, the community center reopened with a new library and music room. During the ceremony, Enrique was called to speak. He stepped onto the small makeshift stage, looked out at the modest audience, and felt a lump in his throat. "I spent my life believing my worth was in what I possessed," he began. "But I learned from these people that true legacy is built by what we offer to others. I don't want them to see me as a businessman, but rather as someone willing to learn and serve." The respectful silence was followed by heartfelt applause. There were no photographer's flashes, no newspaper headlines, just the recognition of touched hearts. In that moment, Enrique understood that his transformation was complete. Luxury still existed in his life, but it was no longer his master. For the first time, he felt truly free, and when he met Ottavio in Clara's eyes, he realized that the fortune he had sought for so long had finally been found. Not in cars or parties, but in the value